They said peace had finally come, but it sure didn't feel like peace that morning on Main Street. The war was over, the boys were home, the flags had come down, yet the line outside Miller's department store wound all the way around the block like a snake that refused to die. We were all waiting for the same thing, nylon stockings. They'd promised us that once the fighting stopped, the nylons would be back. Soft as silk, strong as steel, the ads said. But nobody mentioned that the factories were still struggling to switch from parachutes to pantyhose. So there we stood, shivering in our coats, clutching ration books in hope. Some women had been in line since before dawn, faces powdered, lipstick perfect, as if presentation alone might earn them a better chance. Others had babies wrapped in blankets, humming lullabies to keep them quiet. I remember the sound of shoes scuffing against concrete, hundreds of them, a slow shuffle of patience. The woman behind me was Mrs. Lewis, the baker's wife. She whispered, "They say the shipment's only 30 boxes. That's maybe 100 pairs. And how many women are here?" I asked. "Too many," she sighed. When the doors finally opened, the crowd surged forward like water breaking a dam. The clerks shouted, "1 pair per customer," but the noise drowned them out. Boxes flew open, tissue paper fluttered, the air smelled of perfume, sweat, and desperation. By the time I reached the counter, the shelves were bare. The clerk, a boy barely old enough to shave, shook his head without even meeting my eyes. "All out, ma'am. Try again next week." I walked home empty-handed, heels clicking on the cold pavement. Posters in shop windows screamed about progress. Radios, refrigerators, shiny new cars. But for women like me, progress looked a lot like standing in another line. When I reached my building, Mrs. Finch from upstairs was sitting on the stoop, cigarette in one hand, an eyebrow pencil in the other. She was drawing a line up her bare leg. "Ran out of nylons?" she asked, smirking. "Sold out again." "Well," she said, shading carefully, "when the world runs out of silk, you make your own." That night, I stood before the mirror and tried it myself, a little tea to tint the skin, a steady hand to draw the seam from heel to thigh. The reflection staring back at me looked alive again. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Word travels faster than ration cards. By the end of the week, 3 neighbors had knocked on my door asking if I could paint their stockings too. One offered 50 cents, another brought a jar of jam as payment. I didn't plan to say yes, but there was a thrill in it, a small secret shared between women who refused to give up feeling beautiful. Soon my kitchen smelled like rouge and brewed tea. I laid out towels on the table, lined up pencils and brushes. The floor was dusted with the faint shimmer of powder. When the first customer looked at her legs and gasped, "It looks real," I felt something spark inside me. Every evening, after supper, I'd take appointments. We'd talk while I worked about husbands still searching for steady jobs, about ration stamps that never stretched far enough, about the strange quiet of peace. There was laughter too, soft and knowing. For those few minutes, we weren't housewives or widows or factory girls. We were artists, conspirators, dreamers in lipstick and curls. It wasn't just vanity, it was recovery. After years of uniforms and sacrifice, we were learning how to feel like ourselves again, even if it meant drawing beauty out of thin air and borrowed color. One day, I heard 2 men joking at the grocer's counter. "All that fuss for stockings," one said. "Can't they just go without?" The other laughed. Women always needing something. They didn't understand. It wasn't the nylon we missed. It was the feeling of choice, of small luxuries that reminded us the world could be gentle again. That night, as I cleaned my brushes, I looked at my hands stained faintly brown from tea and pencil and thought, maybe this is what rebuilding looks like. Not factories or flags, but little acts of grace repeated across 1,000 kitchens. I didn't know it yet, but my small experiment would travel farther than I ever imagined. Before long, women from the next town would be knocking, bringing coins and stories, leaving with legs painted in hope. By the time lilacs bloomed along Maple Street, my tiny kitchen studio had a waiting list. Names filled a school notebook I'd found in the hall closet, penciled in careful rows with times, small notes in the margins. Wedding Saturday, interview Monday, Mary's first date back. I charged a dime, sometimes a quarter if a woman asked for a darker shade for evening. More often than not, they paid with jam, eggs, a spool of ribbon, a good story. We were bartering in beauty and news. They came in 2s and 3s, coats folded over chair backs, perfume mixing with the clean sting of tea leaves and rubbing alcohol. I'd tape a towel to the chair, set my box of pencils and brushes on the table, and say, toe to heel to knee, now don't wiggle. Some closed their eyes and breathed out slowly, as if my pencil were a prayer. Others filled the kitchen with laughter, gossip sliding across the floor like sunlight. I learned that lines don't just make a leg look longer, they make a woman feel ready. Ready for church, for a picture on a brother's mantle, for a second try at a first impression. In a season when shelves were still thin and hearts still careful, a seam could steady a day. Word drifted farther than I guessed. One afternoon, Mrs. Lewis burst through my door with a newspaper rolled tight in her hand. "You're in print," she declared, thumping it down. There, on page 4, sat a small column, "Maple Street stocking artist paints away nylon shortage." The reporter had never called me by name, just initials, but the story was kind, even admiring. It talked about local ingenuity and the lady's clever fix when industry lags behind. There was a line I liked more than I should have: "When the factories are slow to remember women, women remember each other." I laughed until I didn't, because praise has a way of carrying a shadow. By supper, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Women I didn't know, 2 from across the river, 1 from the next county who offered $1 if I'd take her before Friday. At the grocer's, men tipped their hats. At the bakery, a clerk slipped me an extra roll and said, "For the artist." But in the hardware store, I heard a different tone. "Bad for business," a man muttered, not quietly enough, to his friend. "If the department store can't sell stockings when they arrive, they'll cut orders again. Town needs trade, not tricks." His friend grunted. "Tricks pay her rent, I guess." I pretended I hadn't heard. But words can tug at you the way a hangnail does, small, constant, hard to ignore. 2 days later, Mr. Miller from the department store paid me a visit. He stood politely in the doorway, hat in his hands, eyes traveling from my towel-draped chair to the line of brushes drying in a jar. "Miss," he began, then caught himself. "Mrs. Carter, I thought I'd see how you were doing." "Busy," I said, forcing a smile. "Would you like some tea?" He declined. "There's talk," he said, staring at the floorboards, "that your service is keeping women from purchasing stockings when we do manage to get them." I set the brush down. "With respect, Mr. Miller, the shelves were bare 3 months straight." He sighed the way decent men sigh when the math doesn't add up. "I know. It's just when the shipment comes, we need them to sell. The rep says our numbers look poor." "Your numbers," I answered before I could soften it, "aren't the only numbers that matter." He flushed. Not angry, exactly, just tired. "Be careful, Mrs. Carter. Folks don't like lines they can't control." When he left, I stood a long time at the sink, the water running too hot, thinking about control. About how many lines in this town were drawn by people who never had to stand in the cold for anything. Attention has its own weather. It warms, then it burns. A week after the article, a gentleman from the Herald, a real reporter this time, proper hat, notebook, knocked on my door. He asked smart questions, took neat notes, chuckled at my price in jam. He asked if he could take a photograph. "Just of your hands," he said, as if modesty were a kindness he was offering me. He posed me at the table, the brush hovering above a shin like a paintbox Madonna. When the flash popped, something inside me startled, pride, fear, both. The piece ran on Sunday. By Monday morning, 2 things arrived: a dozen more appointments and a notice from the city clerk politely reminding me that enterprises conducted from private residences may require licensing. "Enterprise," I repeated, holding the paper over the sink. The word felt too heavy for my little towel and tea. Still, I walked to the clerk's office in my good coat, signed a form that asked for more answers than I had, and paid a fee with crumpled bills from my apron drawer. Licenses don't change neighborhoods. Rumors do. A woman I'd known since school crossed the street rather than pass my gate. A tea church. The wife of a councilman squeezed my hand and whispered, "Good for you," so softly it sounded like careful. That Friday brought the first real trouble. A young bride-to-be June sat in my kitchen with her shoes off, toes pointed like a dancer's. Her wedding was Sunday, and the department store had failed her. Her mother folded and unfolded a handkerchief, working it thinner with worry. "We'll make them perfect," I said, and for once my voice had no tremor. I'd just finished the second leg when a knock rattled the door louder than it needed to. Mr. Miller stood on the step, hat in hand, but he wasn't alone. With him was a man I didn't know. Square shoulders, square jaw, square tone. "Afternoon," the stranger said, flashing a badge I barely had time to read. He was polite but official, the kind of polite that lives in rulebooks. "We've had a complaint. Unlicensed cosmetic practice. Health concerns." "I have a license," I said, pulling the form, still warm from my pocket whenever I was nervous. He scanned it, nodded once, handed it back. "This one is general trade. The complaint mentions skin dyes. We'll need to." June's mother stood. "My daughter gets married in 2 days," she said, small but ferocious. "If you want to stop her stockings, you'll have to stop the wedding too." The man blinked, kindness flickered, then returned to procedure. "Ma'am, I'm only Mr. Miller," cut in, eyes soft. "No need to make a scene," he said to the officer, then to me. "Could we, perhaps, speak outside?" On the porch, his voice dropped. "It isn't me," he said quickly. "It's a council matter. Someone complained, maybe several someones. I told them you're clean, careful, but you're visible now." We stood in the smell of lilacs and dust, the town moving around us like a slow parade of habit. "What do they want?" I asked. He looked at his hat. "For you to stop, or to move, or to be smaller." I surprised us both. "I can't make the shipments come faster, but I can make a bride feel whole. Isn't that part of what a town is for?" He swallowed. "Mind your ink," he said at last, half smiling, half pleading. "And use this." He pressed a small box into my hand, a package of new artist's pencils from his store. "They draw a cleaner line." When he left, I leaned on the railing, the pencils bright as hope in my palm. Sometimes resistance looks less like a fist and more like a quietly delivered tool. June's stockings were perfect. The next day, her mother returned with a cherry pie and eyes full of apology for the town, the times, maybe for all of us. "You saved the day," she whispered. I wanted to say I hadn't saved anything, only borrowed it from ingenuity. I took the pie and said thank you instead. In the weeks that followed, I adjusted. I boiled my teas longer for better tint, switched to hypoallergenic powders, kept a clean ledger, learned to say, "I'm booked" when evenings needed to be quiet. I fixed seams for job interviews, funerals, first Sundays back in the world. I did less talking and more listening. That's how you learn what a town is really made of. The article brought one more surprise, a letter from a woman in another city, Columbus, stamped neat and businesslike. "Could you teach me?" it asked. "My neighborhood could use this too." I wrote back the way Mrs. Finch had spoken on the stoop, briefly, boldly, with a wink I could only trust the paper to carry. "Toe to heel, heel to knee, don't wiggle." By late summer, the department store finally got a real shipment. Women lined up before dawn again, but the mood was different, more patient, less desperate. Some still came to me afterward out of habit or preference, not need. They said the nylon felt nice, but the kitchen felt kinder. I didn't fool myself. A seam in ink is no match for a factory at full steam. But for a season, we'd written our own supply into the margins of scarcity. We hadn't just colored skin. We'd colored in the missing pieces of our confidence. On the last warm night of August, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, listening to the radio drift from a neighbor's window. Fireflies stitched the yard with little, living commas. I thought about lines, the ones I drew, the ones the town tried to draw around me, the ones women cross every day without making a sound. It struck me that what we'd built wasn't a business so much as a bridge from "please wait" to "I'm ready now," from "maybe" to "yes," and bridges don't last on ink alone. I closed my notebook of appointments, slid a pencil behind my ear, and whispered to the evening, "Tomorrow, we'll make something sturdier." The fall of 1946 came early that year. The air smelled of apples and coal smoke, and the leaves on Maple Street turned the same amber shade as the tea I used for tint. Newspapers carried a headline that made the town buzz: "DuPont announces full nylon return." The picture showed smiling women holding stockings like treasure maps, as if the war and the waiting had all been a dream we'd finally woken from. I read it twice, then set it beside the coffee pot. So this was at the end of the line, literally and otherwise. By the end of the week, Miller's department store had windows dressed like a holiday, mannequins gleaming in fresh beige and black, prices printed in proud red ink. The first shipment arrived on a Thursday. By Friday, the line was back tidy, eager, but not desperate. The world had shifted again, and I could feel the current pulling. Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. Mrs. Finch, the one who'd taught me the first pencil trick, stood there holding 2 shiny pairs of nylons in her gloved hands. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" she said. "They are," I answered. She looked past me, at the table where my brushes lay drying. "You'll close up now, I suppose?" I smiled. "Suppose so," but when she left, I didn't pack away the brushes. Instead, I sat at the table, dipped one into the last of my tea, and traced a thin line across a scrap of paper just to hear the whisper of it. The sound was small, but it reminded me that quiet things often carry the longest echoes. The next days were slow. Fewer knocks, fewer whispers of laughter in my kitchen. I cleaned the curtains, polished the kettle, told myself I'd rest. But by the third evening, rest began to feel like erasure. Then came the letter from Columbus, the woman I'd written to weeks ago. Her handwriting looped like ribbon. "Dear Mrs. Carter, the nylons are back, but the women still come. They say it isn't about stockings anymore. They just like to talk while someone listens." That line sat with me all day. Maybe what I'd started wasn't a business, it was a room where women could breathe. And maybe that was something the factories couldn't mass produce. So I opened the door again. I called it Tea and Tint, not for money, though I charged enough to keep the lights on, but for company. Women came with their nylons neatly folded in handbags, yet they still asked me to draw a little color. It became a ritual more than a remedy. A thin line of pigment, a thicker line of conversation. We talked about new schools, the veterans' dances, the strange excitement of television sets appearing in windows downtown. Sometimes a woman would confess she didn't recognize her husband anymore. Sometimes she'd ask if it was wrong to want more than she'd been promised. I'd dip my brush, nod, and say, "A little darker here," because the right words often hide inside small gestures. One afternoon, Mr. Miller stopped by again, this time with no hat, no lecture, just a cup of coffee from the corner diner. "You were right," he said, settling into the chair I offered. "The numbers look fine. The women buy stockings and still visit you. I suppose there's room for both," I said. He chuckled. "Seems there's always room when women make it." Before he left, he looked at the drying rack near the window. "You ever think about selling those colors? Real dye, I mean. Something gentle for fabric. My sister swears the store dyes run too harsh." "I mix them by feel," I said. "Then bottle your feel," he answered. People would pay for that. After he was gone, I stood by the window for a long time. The idea scared me. Business again. Permits, expectations, but it also hummed like the radio when the dial catches the right frequency. Maybe progress wasn't about lines ending. Maybe it was about tracing new ones. By winter, my table had changed shape. Glass jars replaced teacups. Labels in my careful handwriting read rose, honey, walnut, amber. I sold the bottles at the Saturday market beside the women who baked pies and knitted mittens. Some called me the color lady. Others, quietly, still said the stocking painter. Both felt true. One morning, a young girl came to the stall with her mother. She couldn't have been more than 10. She pointed to the brush tucked behind my ear and whispered, "Is that the magic pencil?" Her mother laughed, embarrassed, but I bent down so our eyes met. "It was," I said. Then it became something else. "What?" "A reminder that we can always make do and sometimes make better." She smiled, serious the way children are when they understand more than adults think they can. I handed her a small bottle of honey color. "For your dolls," I said. She grinned as if I'd given her gold. At night, after the market quieted and the snow muffled the street, I'd sit at my table again. The radio hummed softly, the same voices that had once announced shortages now selling abundance. I dipped a brush into warm water, watched the color bloom, and thought about all the lines that had led here, those drawn in tea, those written in newspaper columns, those invisible but unbroken between women who refused to stop imagining. I knew the nylons would last longer than my paint. They'd hang in shop windows for decades, proof that progress had returned. But deep down, I also knew something the advertisements didn't, that even when the shelves are full, there's always another kind of scarcity, the hunger for connection, for being seen, for making something with your own two hands. And that, I realized, was a shortage no factory could fix. Time has a way of softening everything, even the memories that once felt sharp enough to cut. It's been more than 30 years since the nylon shortage, though most people these days don't even know there ever was one. They see a pair of stockings in a department store and think nothing of it, smooth, endless, always there. But I remember a world before the shelves were full. And I remember how a single line, drawn in tea and courage, made me feel alive. The shop on Main Street still stands, though it's a hardware store now. Miller's sign is long gone, and so is Miller himself. The window where women once pressed their faces, hoping for stockings, now holds boxes of light bulbs and screwdrivers. Every time I pass by, I see my younger self reflected faintly in the glass, the girl with a brush, steady hand, and no idea she was painting more than legs. Sometimes my granddaughter, Lucy, asks about those years. She's 12, all elbows and questions, the kind of girl who wants to know how things worked before they were automatic. She sits at my kitchen table, the same one I once used for painting, swinging her legs as I tell her about the lines, the colors, the laughter. "Didn't people think it was strange?" she asked once. "Oh, I'm sure they did," I told her. "But when the world runs short of something, the brave ones get creative." She smiled at that, though I don't think she fully understood. Children never do until the world runs short on something they need. The jars of dye are still on my shelf, labels fading. Rose, honey, walnut, amber. They're little ghosts of an old kind of hope. Sometimes I open one and stir it gently with a brush, just to see the color bloom again. It's strange, back then, I thought what we were doing was small. Painting stockings, passing time, making do. But now I see it differently. We were rebuilding something that had nothing to do with nylon. We were stitching together the parts of ourselves that the war had frayed: dignity, imagination, friendship. Every act of creation, no matter how humble, is rebellion against loss. And in that tiny kitchen, surrounded by laughter and tea, we were rebelling beautifully. A few years ago, the local paper wrote a piece about hidden histories of our town. They interviewed veterans, shopkeepers, teachers. Then, at the end, there was a small paragraph about a woman known as the stocking painter, who brought color to the women of Maple Street when the world had run out. They didn't even use my name, but I smiled when I read it. Sometimes being remembered isn't about credit, it's about continuity, the way one woman's imagination can ripple forward, touching hands she'll never hold. Lucy found the article tucked in a drawer last summer. "You were famous?" she gasped. "Just for a moment," I said. "But the best moments don't need headlines." On quiet afternoons, she likes to paint beside me. Not stockings, of course, notebooks, scraps of wood, her own fingernails sometimes. I watch the way her hand moves, steady, precise, and it feels like watching time travel, like the line I drew in 1946 never really ended. It just changed hands. One day she asked, "Grandma, what color do you think hope is?" I thought about it for a long time. The kettle whistled softly, the light slanted across the room just like it used to when the brushes glistened on the towel. Finally, I said, "It's not one color. It's whatever shade you make when the world gives you none." She nodded, as if that made perfect sense, and went back to painting. Sometimes, when the house grows quiet and the evening settles like dust, I take out my old brush, the same one that once painted seems straight as truth. My hands shake now. I couldn't draw a clean line if I tried, but I still trace the motion in the air, muscle memory of 1,000 legs, 1,000 laughs, 1,000 stories whispered over tea. I never became rich or well known. I never owned a factory or a storefront. But I built something invisible and unbreakable, a thread that tied women together in a time when everything else was coming apart. And every time I see a young woman walk down the street, confident and sure of herself, I feel a quiet pride. Because maybe, in some small way, that confidence began with us with brushes, tea, and the courage to draw beauty back into a weary world. When Lucy leaves for college someday, I'll give her one of the old jars, honey, I think, because it shines when the light hits it right. She'll probably laugh and say, "Grandma, it's just colored water," and I'll tell her the truth. "No, sweetheart. It is proof that there is always something you can make, even when the world runs out." So this is the last line I'll ever draw, not in tea, not in ink, but in memory, and maybe, when I'm gone, someone will remember that once upon a time, a line wasn't just a line, it was a bridge between who we were and who we dared to become. If this story touched something in your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe. Every click, every comment, helps us keep these memories alive, reminding us all how simple moments once shaped an entire world.